I'm Emily Guy Birken, and you're listening to Deep Thoughts About Stupid Shit. Because pop culture is still culture. And shouldn't you know what's in your head? On today's episode, I will be sharing my deep thoughts about the 1988 film Who Framed Roger Rabbit with my sister, Tracie Guy Decker. And with you. Let's dive in.
Have you ever had something you love dismissed because it's just pop culture? What others might deem stupid shit, you know matters. You know it's worth talking and thinking about. And so do we. So come overthink with us as we delve into our deep thoughts about stupid shit.
So, Tracie, I know you've seen this movie because we saw it in the theater together with our grandma.
Really?
Yeah, don't you remember? She hated it.
Ruth?
Mm-hmm.
It had to be Ruth. I can't imagine our Betta going to the movie theater for some reason.
Yeah, it was, I think Grandma Ruth didn't really do fantasy. Like, if it wasn't in the real world, it just didn't work for her. And so, like, I remember her being like, that's the silliest thing I've ever seen. But tell me what you recall about this film.
I loved this movie so much. Listeners, as a child, my aspiration, whenever anybody asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would say I was going to be an animator. That was my answer. I wanted to be an animator. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was like a childhood fantasy come to life. Not the whole murder plot, but you know, like the actual interactions between animation and real world. And I just remember the magic and the wonder, which now is like old hat, you know, with what CGI can do. But at the time, it was analog effects that were so amazing. Like when Roger spits water, and like, that's the one that I remember very clearly, but other things as well. But I just loved it. I loved Roger. I loved Jessica. I thought it was so funny and absurd that this super sexy animated human woman was like in this romantic and sexual, though I didn't think of it that way in 1988, relationship with this animated bunny. And I haven't seen it in a long time, but I think of it with such fondness. And even in some of the lines, it's one of those ones that we talk about, like the furniture of your mind, like, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way, that Jessica says at one point or something like that. Mostly what I remember is how it made me feel, honestly. But yeah. Okay. So tell me, why are we talking about it today? Why are we talking about Roger Rabbit?
So this is one of those films from my childhood that I absolutely loved and then revisited as an adult, partially to show it to my kids and just partially because it was fun many times. And I really, really love what the creators did with this film, because it's similar to Clue in that they took a ridiculous idea and took it seriously, but not themselves. So right. Like they thought deeply about what it would mean if toons were real. And they thought deeply about how to bring this to life in a way that would feel real to the audience. To the point where Bob Hoskins, and they worked on this film. It took many years to work on this film. I can remember Bob Hoskins saying like he had his last child in like 1986, and he's like, I didn't see the kid till he was 2 because of just how intensive this work was. And he actually had very strong hallucinations for several years afterwards because he was acting against nothing, and so he had to imagine it. So the dedication to craft is something that I could not have articulated that as a 9-year-old, but that is part of what I adore about this movie. And it's not just the dedication to craft in the animation and the seamless combination of animation and live action, because that is part of it. That's just technically amazing. There's also the dedication to craft in terms of the actors, in that they had them take mime training so that they could hold their arms in a way so like I am holding a 60-pound rabbit, even though there's nothing in your hand. And the number of times they had takes. So they would do a take first with a little like rubber version of the character so that they would be the right heights. They'd know what eye line they needed to have. And then they would do it again without it. And like, just amazing. But also the craft of writing this story, which is very loosely based on a novel by, I think his name's Gary K. Wolfe, called Who Censored Roger Rabbit, that is very different. The setup is reasonably the same, but they took that as inspiration. They mixed in an unused plot that was going to be the third film in the Chinatown trilogy.
Oh.
So the plot of Cloverleaf buying up the red car and building freeways was from the Chinatown trilogy and is based on reality.
Right.
Just as the water subplot in Chinatown is based on what really happened. And created this bonkers thing. Like, it's just bonkers. That is wonderful and beloved and amazing and showcases so much talent in so many directions. So I have watched it relatively recently with my kids. We have a family movie night fairly regularly, and we've watched it relatively recently. The kids loved it. When I was watching it last night, they came in and they're like, it was their bedtime. They're like, "Can we watch the end of it with you?" I was like, "Not tonight, guys. You got to go to bed another time." And so I kind of wanted to just revisit it. I'm also in some ways hoping that we have any younger listeners, I think most of our listeners are probably about our age, but if we have any younger listeners who aren't familiar with this film, I would really love for them to check it out.
All right. Well, remind me, what is the basic plot of Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
So this is set in 1947 in Los Angeles, where cartoons are real. The animated characters are real. They live in Toontown, which is its own little space. And rather than animating cartoons, they act in Hollywood films. So Roger Rabbit has been blowing his lines in his cartoons lately. And his employer, R.K. Maroon of Maroon Cartoons, is convinced that it's because his heart is broken. Because even though cartoons cannot be harmed or killed, they fall to pieces just like anyone else when they're emotionally upset. And it's because his wife is sneaking out on him. So he hires Eddie Valiant, who is a human private investigator.
So Roger hires him or Maroon does?
Maroon does. Okay. Sorry. R.K. Maroon hires Eddie Valiant to take pictures of Roger's wife, Jessica, cheating on him, basically.
Doing patty cake.
Playing patty cake. Yes.
Yeah.
Eddie, we gather from several things. He had a brother named Teddy. They had been in the police force together. And they were apparently raised by a circus clown. Their dad was a circus clown. And they were working Toontown. They'd been in the police, then they opened a private investigation, Valiant and Valiant, together. And they were working a case in Toontown when a Toon dropped a piano on Teddy's head. Eddie got away with just a broken arm, but Teddy died. And so that was 5 years before, and Eddie has been drinking and not barely surviving since then. He's just kind of broken. So he gets a camera from his girlfriend Dolores, who who works at a bar across the street from his office, and goes to the Ink and Paint Club, which is where Jessica sings regularly, where he meets Marvin Acme, who is the owner of Acme Gags. If it's an Acme, it's a gasser. But so they make all of the like silly joke things like hand buzzers and disappearing ink and that sort of thing. And after the show, when he meets Jessica, assuming she's a rabbit because she's Jessica Rabbit, and she's not. She's this statuesque bombshell with gravity-defying bosoms, and voiced by Kathleen Turner, excuse me.
Gravity-defying bosoms.
Yes.
Is that a line from the movie? That does not sound like that's an Emily Guy Birken original. Okay. Gravity-defying bosoms. Great.
I did watch something where they were saying that in animating her, what they did was anytime a real woman's breasts would go down, hers went up, and then vice versa to make them. So that's what I was thinking.
Okay.
So Eddie is like just overwhelmed with not realizing like what a bombshell she is. He ends up taking pictures of Jessica and Marvin playing patty cake. Literally.
Who's Marvin?
Marvin Acme owns
the Acme guy. The Acme guy.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So he shows the pictures to Roger, gets paid by RK Maroon, and is like, all right, I'm done. Well, the next morning, old friend of his from the police department comes along and says, Acme was killed last night by a toon. Someone dropped a safe on his head, and it's clear that it was Roger. And they've got paint on the rope that matches the yellow paint, the yellow color of Roger's gloves. So Eddie ends up talking to Roger's friend, Baby Herman, who was one of his co-stars, who says, like, this is no way that Roger killed anyone. And the real issue was that Marvin Acme had always promised to leave Toontown, which he also owned, to the Toons. And so the killing was really about getting his will, because if the will is not found by midnight that night, the Toontown is going to go to the highest bidder, which is Cloverleaf Industries, which has just recently bought the red car, which is the cable car, which, as Eddie early on says, like, Los Angeles is the best public transit system in the world, which is kind of funny to hear now.
Yeah.
But was probably true in 1947, or at least could be said.
Wow.
So Eddie, because a toon killed his brother, is like, I don't work for toons. I'm not going to let you hire me, Baby Herman. Nothing. But he then notices in the pictures that he took that in Acme's pocket is a piece of paper that says Last Will and Testament. Roger finds Eddie, begs him for help. He ends up helping him because Judge Doom, who is the magistrate in Toontown,
that's Christopher Lloyd, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's this is one of the many reasons why Christopher Lloyd is a giant in my childhood. So Judge Doom has a group of weasels who are his Doom weasels, who his henchmen. Grab people for it. There's henchmen, yeah. And so they come and threaten Eddie, who hides Roger. And Roger has handcuffed them together as a joke, and Eddie doesn't have keys to those handcuffs. So he hides Roger in his sink and pretending like he's washing his socks. And that's what you remember with Roger spitting the water out, which is just amazing. There's another moment where the lead weasel says, like, we're going to put you out to dry. And he, like, brushes the water towards Eddie twice. And it's so cool. It's so cool. Eddie ends up taking Roger to Dolores because she has a back room that's left over from Prohibition. That's like a hidden room. Eddie manages to get out of the handcuffs, which my favorite moment is when Roger gets out of just pulls his hand out of the handcuff. And Eddie's like, you could have gotten out of that the entire time. No, not the entire time. Only when it was funny. Oh, my goodness. Eddie leaves Roger there. Dolores goes to check probate to see if there's see what's going on with Marvin Acme's estate, and learns that that's when they learn that at midnight, it's going to transfer to the highest bidder, which has already been Cloverleaf. And Jessica Rabbit comes to visit Eddie, and Dolores catches them, even though Eddie is trying to push her away. But he's getting changed when she comes in, so his pants fall down as he's trying to push her away. And then as he leans down to pick them up, his head bumps her breasts. And they go, boom.
Make that noise?
They make that noise. Oh, goodness. So I've lost the thread. Oh, that's right. They go back to the bar because they hear Roger singing. He is entertaining the regulars there. They force him back into the hidden room because Judge Doom is on his way because someone has mentioned that that's happening. And Judge Doom manages to entice him out by knocking Shave and a haircut because no Toon can resist 2 bits. And they get away with the help of Benny, a cab.
Yeah.
Yeah, an animated cab that was had been locked up in the Weasel's real truck. They manage to get away. They hide at a movie theater, and the plan is they're just going to get out of town. But while they're at the movie theater, they see a newsreel that explains, that says that R.K. Maroon has sold his studio to Cloverleaf. And so Eddie realizes that R.K. Maroon must be up to his neck. So he calls Maroon, tells him he has the will, which is missing. Although Roger, when he went to Jessica's dressing room, which is the last place Marvin was seen before he died, found a blank piece of paper. And wrote a love letter on it. Eddie claims that he has the will. While they're arguing, someone shoots and kills Maroon, and Eddie takes off. He thinks it is Jessica because he sees her running away, but that's because she had hit Roger over the head to get him out of there and keep him safe because she loves him and doesn't want him to get hurt. So Eddie ends up going back into Toontown for the first time since his brother died. Before he goes in, he is about to take a drink and he realizes, no, I shouldn't do that. And he pours out the alcohol and he has a cartoon gun with cartoon bullets. And he throws the bottle in the air and shoots it with one of the bullets, which is kind of a racist caricature. It's a Native American. All of the bullets are kind of Old West themed. So in Toontown, a lot of wacky stuff happens. He finds Jessica. They realize that Roger has stolen Eddie's car and is heading back. And Benny the cab says, if you ever need a lift, just stick out your thumb. And so unintentionally, Eddie sticks out his thumb. Benny comes along and takes him back out of Toontown trying to find Roger. And Judge Doom is there. He has a way of killing Toons, which he calls dip, which is basically turpentine, acetate, acetone, and a couple other things that would basically erase paint. And so he pours it on the road, and so Benny rides over it and it hurts his tires. And so he pretends to be dead. And Judge Doom takes Eddie and Jessica back to Acme's warehouse. Roger then comes along in Eddie's car, which is completely broken at that point because he's not a good driver. Benny sees him and he takes over driving. He's like, I'm the cab, I will drive.
So Benny, the cartoon cab, is driving a real car.
Real car. He gets behind the wheel and using his broken tires
as hands.
As hands
to
and
drive.
Feet to drive.
Okay.
So they get to the warehouse and Judge Doom reveals his evil plot. So which
is basically the highway system.
The highway system, yes.
Yeah,
he wants
that's his evil plot.
Yeah. He wants Toontown so that he can erase it off the map using dip and then build freeway on it. And then it also turns out that though Judge Doom has looked odd but human the entire time, he is in fact a Toon.
Right, he's like wearing a skin suit or something.
Mm-hmm. And he was the Toon who killed Teddy's brother.
Right, with the crazy yellow eyes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Eddie realizes that he can defeat the Weasels because they're consistently like laughing, and they say to each other, "Don't laugh, you'll laugh yourself to death." And Judge Doom is like, "Don't forget what happened to your cousins, the hyenas." So he puts on this like ridiculous show to make them laugh to death, which happens.
And then they're like animated souls with like X's over their eyes that like go up like in black and white.
Yes, and holding harps.
So the souls are like sort of not as much color as they were when they were alive, right?
Yeah, they're not black and white, but they're kind of like greenish grayscale.
Kind of translucent too. Like you can sort of see through them. Yeah.
Yes. So Jessica and Roger are tied up together with a spray of dip towards them. So Eddie manages to defeat the weasels. He also manages to kill Judge Doom. First, it's a steamroller rolls over him, and then it's after that he realizes he's a cartoon.
That's how we know he's a toon.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so the truck that has the huge amount of dip that's supposed to destroy Toontown breaks through the wall that is what separates the warehouse from Toontown. And it breaks through and is going slowly forward, and a train runs it over, and it's gone. So I imagine there's some bad stuff happening further along in Toontown, but that's it.
A real train or an animated train?
An animated train.
Okay.
So, yeah, everything's animated in Toontown.
Yeah.
Unless a human has come in with a car or something.
Okay.
And that, Jessica and Roger are, happily reunited as husband and wife. And Eddie and Dolores are back together again. It's not clear if they were like exes or what, but they things have been strained for them since Eddie's been struggling with alcohol. And they walk off into the cartoon sunset.
And the will is on.
Yes. Thank you. I totally forgot that. Eddie realizes that one of Acme's gags was disappearing, reappearing ink, because Marvin, when he met him, sprayed him with ink, and Eddie got mad. And he's like, "No, don't worry. It's already gone." And he looked down, the stain was gone. And then that evening, after Judge Doom was dead, Dolores says, like, "What's that on your shirt?" And he's like, "Oh, it's disappearing, reappearing ink." And he realizes that must be what the will was written in. And so he gives it to Roger. So like, "Why don't you read your wife the love letter?" And so he starts reading it, and then it realizes it's now the last will and testament of Marvin Acme. So much happier ending than Chinatown.
So where do we start with this, Em?
Oh, I'm not sure. So let's talk about like gender and gender performance in this, because that is one thing that does not necessarily hold up. So Jessica Rabbit is a male fantasy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now she is based on, because this is very much a noir film, even though it's got cartoons.
Yeah.
She is based on the noir femme fatale that you don't know if you can trust or not, who is absolutely gorgeous and out for her own interests. And the animators even said there's a behind the scenes documentary where, like, if this were a real person with these proportions, she'd fall over because, like, this is just not possible. And I know a lot of Gen X kids talk about how Jessica Rabbit was like a sexual awakening for them. And I love the character. Like, there is something oddly empowering, I think, in the fact that she is delightedly, wholeheartedly, completely in love with her husband. And when people ask, like, "What do you see in him?" she says, "He makes me laugh." And even I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way, which is one of, like, I think only 2 lines that are direct from the original book, Who Censored Roger Rabbit. So the idea that she is underestimated and taken for a specific thing because of the way she looks, and she leans into it for her own benefit when necessary. But otherwise, like, that's not who she is. You know, she has that husky voice. She does look the way she does, but that's just because that's how she was drawn. That's not who she is. Who she is someone who is in love with a 3-foot-tall rabbit because he makes her laugh. It's one of those, like, give with one hand, take with the other.
No, it's interesting though, because thinking about the influences, like what it was lampooning was a combination of those noir films and Tex Avery style animation, which, I mean, Tex Avery, he was the animator who did like the wolf with the eyes that bug out, auga, like that guy. Not cool gender-wise, Tex Avery.
No.
Very talented animator in terms of like technical skill, but as like not something like I want my 12-year-old daughter to be watching, right? And that's who is being lampooned in terms of the animation style with Jessica Rabbit. Layer that on top of the noir, where the female characters in Chinatown are not characters, right? Like they're not human. They're tropes,
placeholders.
Yeah, exactly. They're just like, you know, a dame to protect and to have a super traumatic backstory, right? They're trauma porn and objects of protection. And so you layer those two things together, it's not a surprise that the female character is not exactly a role model, not exactly a bastion of feminism, you know?
Yeah. So there's one other moment. So in the documentary that I watched, or the behind the scenes that I watched, they were talking about, they wanted to mix the technical genius of Disney, because their technical use of animation was like superb, second to none. The wonderful characters of Looney Tunes, because their characters were most fun, and the humor of Tex Avery, because Tex Avery was the funniest. They wanted all three of those. And I think that the other scene that had me cringing this time around is definitely a direct descendant of Tex Avery. And that's Baby Herman. When we first meet Baby Herman, it's an animation, like a cartoon that he and Roger are acting, even though it's, you know, obviously a cartoon. And he's a baby, and he's going, cookie, you know, and sounds like a baby. And so initially when they yell cut, all of a sudden he's got this deep, like, smoker's voice.
Right.
And that's very funny. And, like, the thing is, that's something that they do over and over and over again.
Yeah, we get that joke that is a joke we return to over and over and over again.
So a baby with an adult voice, that's funny. And a foul-mouthed baby with an adult voice. Okay. They make Baby Herman what at the time they would have called a womanizer, but what he is
predator.
A predator, because he when we first meet him, like, he's stalking off set and he walks under a woman's legs, and like kind of like lifts up her skirt and is like, "Pardon me, toots." And so, like that, if it's not great, but the scene where Baby Herman comes to meet Eddie, he's there with apparently his wife. And the only reason I know that is because she's listed in this cast as Mrs. Herman, who has him in a baby carriage. And Eddie sees her leaning over with a lighter to the baby carriage, and he's like, "Oh my goodness," and then goes and sees that it's a cartoon character. And Mrs. Herman says, like, "I've been trying to get him to quit, but he won't listen to me." And he's like, "Go buy me a racing sheet, toots," and then smacks her on the butt. And then he talks about, like, "I got a 50-year-old lust and a 3-year-old dinky," which is the only other line to come directly from Who Censored Roger Rabbit. And I know the joke is supposed to be like, it's this adorable baby doing very adult things, but the idea that that is normal adult things is so gross. And some of that is like period correct.
You mean 47 or 88?
1947. So 1947 period correct.
I think I don't want to suggest that it's not gross. It's totally gross. And also, I'm not sure that it's necessarily like normal adult things. I'm putting quotes around the word normal because that's what you said. Like, I think part of the would be humor is that it's actually like beyond normal to put. It's not just like a baby doing adult things. It's an adorable innocent doing wicked things. Right? Like I think the wickedness, the sort of beyond the pale of normality is actually part of the humor. I think. You know, because it's not just that he's like, I can't reach my pipe, or you know, put the blocks on the gas pedal so I can drive to work, or the sort of like it's not you know, it's not Mr. Cleaver.
Yeah, it's a very specific type of adult
who is on the sort of the seedy side of society, and would not be welcome in all adult spaces, even if he had an adult body. And I think that's fair. Meant to be part of the joke. So I'm not sure it's condoning it as normal, which is, I think, part of your initial critique. I think your critique is still valid, that it's gross and it's not funny, regardless of who's doing it. But I do think that there is at least some critique of the behavior even baked into the depiction, because that's where the humor comes, you know, is the juxtaposition is not just of adult to child, but also innocent to, I don't want to say guilty, but whatever the kind of, you know,
sinful.
Yeah.
Now that you're saying that, that's also kind of a noir trope, is talking to like the seedy underworld informant.
Yes, exactly.
Come to think of it, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like taking that seedy underworld informant and putting it in the body of a 3-year-old, and that's meant to be funny. But there still is a judgment of the seedy underworld, I think.
Yeah. I don't think you're wrong. It really hit different this time watching it.
Yeah.
Part of it was I was also, so the film doesn't pass the Bechdel test. Dolores and Jessica are in a scene together, but don't talk to each other. And then other than that, there's not a whole lot of women.
Yeah. Which also makes sense given the influence, right?
Yes.
The films that you named, well, the 3 animation studios that you named, plus film noir, like none of those passed the Bechdel, right? Disney almost never did until the modern era, you know, until the modern Disney era, like the contemporaries. Looney Tunes, are there even any female characters? And Tex Avery for sure didn't.
Yeah.
And Chinatown and the noir almost never did either. So it makes sense that this thing that was kind of hearkening to those pieces of media doesn't pass that.
And that's something that I wondered if, and I don't think Dolores is a character in Who Censored Roger Rabbit. Eddie Valiant is, but I don't believe that there's a Dolores character. And I think that in some ways was like the 1980s version of like, oh yeah, this is kind of anti-feminist, so let's put another woman in here.
It's a sausage fest.
Yeah.
An animated sausage fest.
Yeah, and because like they were going to make it clear that Eddie had no interest in protecting Jessica. And Dolores is a pretty awesome character. Like she takes no guff. And she's capable, she's smart, she's she's a pretty awesome character. She's also just a love interest.
Yeah.
The other thing I actually really appreciated, apparently Bob Hoskins is 5'4", or was. He passed away several years ago. Because I noticed like Dolores towers over him, not just Jessica, and it's because he's not a very tall man. But that actually makes it even more perfect that he's this like down on his luck private eye. He just he
Yeah.
fits the character.
Yeah.
Like they talked about casting Harrison Ford,
Oh.
and I can't imagine that. Like, not that he's not a good actor, but he's just kind of too handsome. There were several other people, like they offered it to Eddie Murphy, who turned it down.
Really?
And, yeah. And he says he regrets turning it down. I don't know that he has the acting chops. Like, honestly, like one of the things that Bob Hoskins brought is he was like classically trained and just a phenomenally talented actor. He was British, which I did not know for years because his American accent is so flawless that when I hear him speaking with his natural speaking voice, which sounds kind of like Cockney almost, it's like, you're putting me on. That's not real, is it?
That's funny.
So this is, Bob Hoskins appreciation post.
That is funny. Okay, so gender, not so great,
Not so great,
and also
but
completely understandable based on the pop culture it was in conversation with.
yes. And it has me wondering about, because people talk about this now in terms of like writing historical fiction or creating a period piece. Like, for instance, Bridgerton. Are you familiar with that at all?
I know of it. I have not watched it.
I have not watched it either, nor have I read the books, but I'm in the romance-landia kind of social media sphere. And there was a lot of angst about the casting of, I'm not going to remember his name, Renee something. But the lead character in the first series was a black man. And it's Regency romance, maybe Victorian romance, but it's 18th century or 19th century romance. So people were like, well, it's not correct. And then the author of the books was kind of an asshole about it. Not that, like, her, not an asshole. She was doing the well-meaning liberal bullshit, in that people were saying like, well, how is this casting okay? And she was like, well, he did such a good job. And then I went back and I realized like I'd written him with blue eyes and I'd forgotten that. And it's just like, she was trying to do the colorblind thing, it sounds like.
Okay.
So there is a conversation about that. Like, if we were to make Who Framed Roger Rabbit today, which we wouldn't, because it wouldn't be the technical feat that it was. But if we were going to do that today, would we make Baby Herman a girl, maybe? Would we make, like Judge Doom?
So it's an interesting question, but I actually think we should blow it open a little bit more than that, because I think, like, we would tell a different story.
True.
We can tell a different story that's set in that time. Maybe it's actually Dolores is the protagonist, and she's worried about her sometime boyfriend, and we see it from her point of view. And she calls on her girlfriends to be like, what do I do? I think Eddie's drinking again. Or even just like the girlfriend's like, get rid of that guy, come out with me. Or I don't know. But like, I think the question is not like, how do we recast this to make it past the Bechdel, but how do we retell it? And I think that will kind of blow it open and could be potentially very, very interesting. Like, what would it look like to tell a noir story that didn't treat female characters as placeholders? What would that look like? And I think that could be really, really interesting, in the same way that, like, in our Dirty Dancing episode, we talked about the convention that we've been given is that Baby would have at least talked about giving up her dreams to be with this boy, this man that she had taken up with.
Yeah.
And the fact that Eleanor Bergstein didn't even consider that, like, that wasn't just a recasting of the romances that we'd seen before. It was a reimagining it. And that's what I would be much more interested in doing. There is something compelling about the noir story, or we wouldn't keep telling it. We wouldn't keep coming back to it. But how could we hold on to what's compelling and bust open or leave behind the shit that is harmful.
That's interesting. I got into got into an online argument with someone. It's been about 8 or 9 years ago now, when they were talking about recasting James Bond, and someone suggested Gillian Anderson, and oh my God, I loved that idea.
Yeah, that would be great.
And there were people who were like, "Well, then why don't we just make him an accountant then?" And I'm like,
What?
"Yeah, like because." What is integral to James Bond is his penis, apparently. And I was like, no, what's integral to James Bond is like violence without morality, loyalty to queen and country, casual sex, gadgets,
Intrigue.
puns, intrigue, travelogue. None of that requires a man. And so someone said to me, like, well, okay, why don't we just write a new story with a female spy? And my problem with that is that we tend to bring our own ideas about women into that, and I can't imagine creating a female spy where they don't have rape as a backstory or something like that. And so, and I think you're absolutely correct. This is a similar thing in that we take the story we have and shift it. And with James Bond, what I liked about that is like we take the story we have and shift it, especially if there are people who have the theory that James Bond is actually not a name. It's like what's the code that's assigned to you when you become 007.
Oh, okay.
So like none of those people are actually James Bond. They're whatever, Rupert Tumney Nuts. Whatever they are.
Tumney nut. Tumney nut.
And so there's no reason why James Bond couldn't be like the new best recruit who is played by Gillian Anderson. Yeah. So, and I'd be totally fine with like, she's a woman named James, or, with Gillian Anderson, I was like, she could be Dana Bond because it also Dana Bond. And then it's a nod to the role that made her famous. Anyway. So that's what's interesting to me is like when we are talking about these compelling stories that we tell over and over and over again, how can we retell them in a more inclusive way without reiterating the same problems that we always have in our storytelling?
I think I like the way you're problematizing this, because I think there's two different things happening related, right? On the one hand, there's the actual story, right? So like, what does it look like to cast a woman as Hamlet and a man as Ophelia? How does that change the way we think about this story? But on the other hand, there's a genre, right? Like, are we talking about Chinatown or are we talking about film noir? Because they're related, but not identical. And I think those are sort of interesting, like, ways to look at the issue of these stories that are beloved, that do have something to offer the culture, and also reify harmful stereotypes and oppression, and like holding on to what is good and working on undoing what is bad, whether it's the actual story and or character, i.e. James Bond, or whether it's the genre, i.e. sort of espionage spy. And I think there are pros and cons to each approach. So you named the con of the genre-based approach, like, I'm just going to invent a female spy. And the problem there that you named is that the impulse that we have been given, we've conditioned to do, is to put like yucky gendered stuff in her backstory, gendered violence. The impulse is to put gendered violence in her backstory. And then on the other hand, like the negative of recasting Gillian Anderson as James Bond is, well, the stupid kerfuffle that people have. But also like creating an authentic story for Gillian Anderson playing this character that reads as authentic. I think that's a really interesting tension.
Well, and that's part of why I so love this film, in that they were not looking at greater social implications. Well, a little bit.
I mean,
a little bit.
The whole traffic thing was kind of...
And and Toons are coded as second-class citizens.
Well, and I mean, just the sort of what is expendable and the profit over everything.
Yeah.
I think there was some social commentary in Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
All right. I will give you that.
It wasn't about gender, though.
No. What I'm talking about is social commentary in the creation of the story, because what they are doing is they are like they're doing what we're talking about, which is like taking something that's familiar and adding something different to it.
Yeah.
So they're taking, noir, which is familiar, or actually they're taking two familiar things and mashing them together. And they do a phenomenal job at it in that they create this world that feels realistic.
Yeah.
There was a series of books that I read a couple of years ago that I loved. It's my favorite zombie novels I've ever loved. And it's because I don't find zombies necessarily, sorry to Scott, necessarily that interesting. But in this story, the zombies came about, it's set in like 19th century England, where it was because of the wars with France, there was a witch or something in France who created the zombie virus and put it in face powder, like high-end face powder, so that the people who became zombies were upper-class women.
Rich.
Yes. And so the way that the society responded to it was so fascinating, because it is how they would respond to upper-class rich women being zombies. An entire industry came about to provide them with brain slices, one a day, so that they could prevent going nuts. And there were all kinds of masks and powders and things like that to cover up the fact that they were zombies. But then there were also men who, because their wives were legally dead because they were zombies, just renounced them and remarried, and so these women were left with nothing and could do nothing, because women had no agency and no power in 19th century England. It was just fascinating, because it was just like, you took something fantastical, plopped it in a real historical time, and thought through, how would this work? And that's what Roger Rabbit is doing, is like they took something that doesn't exist in the real world and thought about, like, how would this affect the real world?
You know, what's interesting too, I noted that I wanted to come back to, like, the thing about how Roger couldn't take his hands out of the cuffs at any time, only when it was funny. Sort of like the cosmological implications, like, of what laws of physics would be for Toons that could move about in the real world, and like that humor is actually a physical law. I friggin' love that. I friggin' love that.
The same with like the shave and the haircut. Like,
yeah. I mean, that's like a psychological thing that, makes a certain amount of sense, but that he couldn't remove his hand from the handcuffs unless it was funny. That's actually kind of physics.
Yeah.
And that, like, to your point about sort of thinking through all the consequences, like taking it seriously, taking the conceit seriously, I think that's an example of that precisely.
Absolutely, yeah. Which is one of the reasons why that's like my favorite moment.
I mean, that's really fantastic. It's funny as a viewer, but it also then, as we overthink it, because that's what we do, like it really points to some deep and like significant thinking on the part of the movie makers about this hypothetical that they have presented themselves with.
Yeah, the amount of thought that went into this. So first was the writing. Now I'll link to it in the show notes. I know very little about the book that this was based on, but there is a YouTuber I really like named Dominic Noble who does something called Lost in Adaptation, where he reads the book that a movie is based on and then watches the movie and then compares them. And so he did that with Who Censored Roger Rabbit. And it really sounds like Wolf had a good basic idea. And in that one, Toons are from comic strips. They're not animated. And so they don't talk, they have speech bubbles.
Neat.
and they hang around, and they like make they apparently like they don't go away, and so it's a huge trash problem.
Oh, that's the thought bubbles. Like,
The
just
thought bubbles.
stick around.
Just stick
Oh,
around.
nice.
It sounds like there was like a framework in that novel that was okay. Like it doesn't sound like Wolf is a gifted writer. Like I hate to say something bad about another writer, especially when I haven't read their book, but just based on the little I know about it, it's not the tour de force that Who Framed Roger Rabbit is. But then the writing is so tight and like so well done in this
In Who
film.
Framed Roger Rabbit.
In Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Yeah. Like it's just perfect. It's just so well done. It's just a very tight script. Everything fits together so nicely. Even the things that are like the last will and testament being written in disappearing, reappearing ink is kind of ridiculous, but we get to meet Marvin Acme and he's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It fits. And then from there, they spent time thinking about how this is going to affect the camera angles and acting decisions and like set design and like all of this different stuff. And like the amount of work that went into it. I mean, it was a true labor of love. And they actually, when they did a sneak preview of it, they did a sneak where it wasn't done yet. And people walked out. Like they did it for the wrong crowd. It was like a Friday night, and it was like high school kids, like boys who were just not interested. And Zemeckis, who's the director, was like, I'm not changing anything. I know this is good. And he was right. He was very much right too. And that there is something so heartwarming to me to see this many people be this committed to something so silly.
Yeah. You know, I think there's a kernel of something in here. Like we have talked on multiple episodes about so the beauty of the way that ideas grow with other people, and the way that like art is not something that springs fully formed from the mind of its creator, but actually kind of talks to and is influenced by other art and grows out of other art. And I think there's something really interesting about the fact that there's this novel that was like had this really interesting concept, but maybe wasn't a great execution, that someone said this would be a great movie and here's how we'll change it, that I find really interesting. And what word did you just use? Like heartwarming? Like
Yeah.
there's something that like makes my chest cavity feel full in the best possible way about that, you know? All right, I'm looking at the time. So I want to ask you, is there anything that you wanted to convey about this film that you haven't had a chance to yet? And then I'll see if I can synthesize what we talked about.
One thing that I found interesting on this rewatch, and I was kind of curious if this was a noir thing or just movies are different from 25, 30 years ago. Oh gosh, no. 36 years ago. 36 years ago. Oh man, I'm old. It felt very gritty and in a way that I don't feel like modern movies are, even when they are period pieces. And part of that was that like the people looked like normal people. So, I mean, and some of that is like Bob Hoskins looked schlubby, and because he was not a very tall man, he had a little bit of a belly. There's a point where you see him without a shirt, and man, does he have a lot of hair. Now, Dolores is quite beautiful. She is played by Joanna Cassidy, who played one of the replicants in
Blade Runner?
Blade Runner, thank you, and had also been a model. But she was in her, I think, mid-40s. So not that she wasn't lovely, but she looked like a normal person, like a very attractive normal person, but not like, well, a lot of times when you see movies now, you look at people and you're just like, how are you real? And then like everyone, like RK Maroon is, you know, just a normal guy. The same thing with Stubby K played Marvin Acme, and so that struck me this time. And I'm not sure what my point is, or exactly what's going on. If this is a difference between 1988 filmmaking, or actually 1986, because it took them 2 years to make it, filmmaking, and 2020's filmmaking. If this is a function of it being a noir, although like when comparing it to Chinatown, I mean Jack Nicholson was at his handsomest in that, and
Yeah, but he certainly did not come off as a movie star.
No. But you could understand why Faye Dunaway, who was gorgeous, would want to sleep with him.
Yeah.
Even with his nose cut. So, like, I'm just very...
It's an interesting observation.
Yeah.
I wonder, my intuition, based on nothing whatsoever except for our conversation, is that in the same way that I was trying to draw out the juxtaposition of Baby Herman's looks and behavior, I think there is, in making the real world real, there's a sharper juxtaposition between the live action and the cartoons. Right? If the live action is like real, not movie star plastic, that feels fantastical, but real, like we could step outside and see it, well, 1947 version of it, then that makes the juxtaposition to the tunes in the film all the more, right? Like, I think if we put Angelina Jolie with her, you know, Hollywood makeup on versus an animated thing, you're like, yeah, well, they're both kind of fantastical.
Yeah,
right?
That's a good
point. But you
point.
put Bob Hoskins against an animated film, you're like, yeah, there's a difference.
They both live in the same world, sort of, or not.
Well, no, they don't.
No,
they
I know.
live completely opposite worlds, right? Like, I think,
but no, like that's really happening. It's not on a screen, is what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it makes that juxtaposition all the That's my like off the cuff, no research.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Like in terms of a creative choice.
Yeah. Well, and that is, in terms of like Bob Hoskins, like I really have trouble imagining. Now, some of it is the acting choices, just because, like, good Lord, was he a gifted actor, and like gifted comedic, and dramatic actor, and like the physical humor, and like I cannot imagine any of the other actors that I saw mentioned as potentials being able to carry that off.
Right. Like Murphy could have done the physical humor, but he's not a particularly gifted dramatic actor.
Yeah. And Harrison Ford just is too handsome. And I also feel like Harrison Ford's another actor who, like, he's always playing Harrison Ford a little bit.
Yeah, he totally plays the type. And this is not his type.
Yeah. And even though he was Deckard in Blade Runner, which is kind of like the sci-fi version of the noir.
Yeah, but it doesn't have the physical comedy or the...
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to get a classically trained actor who can do it all. So.
All right. This one's hard. I'm going to see if I can do it, okay?
Okay.
So you'll have to help me out here. So Who Framed Roger Rabbit was a technical marvel combining live action and animation in ways that were really remarkable 36 years ago and remain impressive. It was a mashup of animation and film noir, and animation, not just animation in general, but actually it sounds like there were 3 specific studios that were meant to be referenced. Disney, who were the best of the best. Looney Tunes, who had the best characters, the most endearing characters. And then Tex Avery, who our filmmakers thought was the funniest. Also the sexiest, Tex Avery. And all that mashed up with noir, in fact, using a plot line from a never-made third Chinatown movie. As a result of those influences, gender in this film, not great. Not a great role model, does not pass Bechdel test. We've got two female characters. Sounds like Dolores actually is pretty awesome. And also, she's the only one. Jessica Rabbit, a very interesting version of the femme fatale with her gravity defying bosoms, who uses her looks and her sex appeal to her advantage, but ultimately, who she really is someone who's in love with a 3 foot tall rabbit because he makes her laugh. We spent some time talking about the character of Baby Herman, who is in some ways a joke that we see over and over and over again in animation, from Boss Baby to the Fennec Fox like son of Nick in Zootopia, who has that same sort of like deep voice but is meant to be a baby. I'm sure there are others that I'm not thinking of.
Tone Loc voicing, I can't remember the baby's name, but the baby and Bebe's kids, which I always found it hilarious.
Yeah, yeah. So this like idea of the kind of deep voiced baby is a joke, a juxtaposition that our culture returns to over and over again. This Baby Herman pushes that to the limit. So it's not just deep voiced and like an adult, but like a kind of a creeper, like a little bit of a sexual predator, potentially, like says things that are very, very crass. So he plays the role of the seedy underworld informant from the noir genre in the form of this infant. Let me see. We talked in terms of the meta piece of this. One of the things that I think appealed to you deeply about this is, like Clue, these movie makers took a ridiculous idea and took it very seriously. Not themselves, but the idea. They set themselves a thought experiment and they followed it through. And they gave it a lot of real attention, thinking through, like, what would the consequences be for our society if, in fact, tunes could interact in the real world and were actors, not just two-dimensional drawings. And so we end up with really interesting things about their psychology and what happens in Toontown and the way the society treats them as second-class citizens. And as I noted, because of the scene that you talked about with the handcuffs, also even some of the laws of physics as they apply to tunes. Let's see. We got into an extended conversation about looking back at beloved characters, stories, or tropes or genres that have things that obviously are compelling or we wouldn't continue to tell them, but also have things that are problematic, hurtful, oppressive, stereotypical, etc., 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 and different ways to try and retell those stories in ways that maintain what is compelling and also correct or somehow problematize the things that are not compelling. And we saw at least two different ways of doing that. Certainly there are others. One is to just recast. So for instance, James Bond played by Gillian Anderson, or in my example, Hamlet played by a female actor, Ophelia played by a male actor. What do we learn about the characters, about the story, when we change the power dynamic because of changing the gender? Another way would be to try to tell different stories in the same setting, in the same genre. So what does it look like to have a film noir style story with the intrigue and the mystery and the violence, but have a female protagonist, have a female character who is not simply a placeholder for trauma and sex appeal? Mm-hmm. We talked at length about the ways in which this film required I started to say despite, but actually because of its fantastical nature, because of its ridiculousness, and also the seriousness with which it was taken, it required a very, very talented actor to play the protagonist role of Eddie, the PI, because he had to be a dramatic actor who could sell the pathos. He had to be a comedic actor, and he actually had to be able to do physical comedy, all while acting against nothing. I think one of our last points, which is kind of interesting, is the ways in which the human actors are ordinary looking, not like movie stars, and how that actually was potentially a very intentional creative choice to help sell the distinction between the live action pieces of this movie and the cartoon animated pieces of this movie, so that we don't have sort of the fantastical movie star who doesn't look like a real person, at least not one that we might meet on the street, acting against the cartoon that we could never meet on the street. I feel like I'm probably forgetting something. I'm forgetting. You didn't say the name of it. You talked a lot about a zombie a zombie book or books that you read.
I will have to look it up because I cannot remember the title of it. Right. So I'll put it in the show notes.
So we'll put in the show notes the story, the conceit of which was that there was a witch who turned rich English women into zombies through their makeup.
There is one thing that I didn't get to that I want to mention. I know as a kid, I was very not concerned. It bothered me that Baby Herman was stuck as a baby his whole life. Because in the same way that this is all about the monster novels I've read. I read a vampire novel years ago where the entire world was vampires. And so at one point, the vampire changes a puppy. And the puppy is stuck as a vampire puppy his entire life. And I was just like, that is the most horrible, cruel thing you could ever do. But I was thinking about it this time also, the fact that Jessica Rabbit will always look like that. You know, she's drawn that way. She doesn't get to age. She doesn't get to change. There's something kind of
tragic,
heartbreaking about that.
Tragic, yeah.
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 So, and I recognize that with Baby Herman. But I'm really realizing how tough that is for all the tunes. But Jessica Rabbit, who is, because like Baby Herman, because of the way she looks, she's expected to be a certain way.
Well, in particular, too, I think it's interesting those two as the juxtaposition, because we can see that it would not be ideal to be a child for our entire life, or to present as a child for our entire life, and we have to actually stop and think about the fact that it would not be ideal to present as a gorgeous, sexy, gravity-defying bosom bombshell for our entire life, because everything about our society has told us that is in fact ideal, and that is what you're going for. And if you have crow's feet, or if your boobs are sagging, like, you need to fix it so that you can continue to look like Jessica Rabbit. So the fact that, recognizing there is actually a sort of tragedy in that is subversive on your part, my sister.
Well, I am a subversive bitch.
You are. All right. Well, we are way over our usual time. So let's see. Next time, we are going to be joined by my former professor, Pat Day, who is going to come on to talk to us about King Kong, both the original and the remakes from the 70s and from the 20-teens. So I'm pretty excited about that. He and I have not been in space together for a long time, several decades. But regular listeners will actually recognize his name because he was the one who oversaw my independent study when my college roommate Jenny and I looked into Fraggle Rock all those years ago. So I'm excited to welcome Professor Day on next time. Now, friends, we just got this new feature. It's awesome. You can text us, like for reals, wherever you are listening, unless you're listening on Patreon, which thank you. You can just write to us. Wherever you are listening, there's like a little button that says send a text message. We will genuinely get that text message on our phones for reals. So please, we want you to send us a message.
Please text us. Let us know what you think about this episode or any episode. Or if there's anything you'd like us to have deep thoughts about in the future.
Yeah, no promises, but we can't do it if you don't tell us.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'll see you next time.
See you next time. Do you like stickers? Sure, we all do. If you head over to guygirlsmedia.com/sign up and share your address with us, we'll send you a sticker. It really is that easy. But don't wait. There's a limited quantity. Thanks for listening. Our theme music is Professor Umlaut by Kevin MacLeod from Incompetech.com. Find full music credits in the show notes. Until next time, remember, pop culture is still culture. And shouldn't you know what's in your head?